Okay, good afternoon. I'm here to demonstrate to you the Yeast Respiration Lab. To make your yeast, you just go ahead and get a package of your active dry yeast, and you would put it into an Erlenmeyer flask. So I pour this entire package into here, and then I would add 100 milliliters of water. To prepare the dead yeast, you can see I've taken that solution and I've put it on a hot plate, and I'm gonna boil that for 10 minutes to make sure that my yeast is dead. I do the same thing for preparing the live yeast, except this time I'm gonna have my live yeast and I'm gonna maintain it at 38 degrees, between 38 and 42 degrees Celsius, and so that's what I've done here. I have my sucrose solution. I just put 5 grams of sucrose into 100 milliliters of water. I have my mineral oil. I have my bio chamber. I have here my lab quest, where I can keep track of the temperature if I need it. And I have my carbon dioxide sensor. So I think I have everything I need to go ahead and get started. I'm gonna use the live yeast as an example for today to give you a sense of how this lab works. So I have water that I have maintained at the correct temperature, and I have a little 50 milliliter beaker. So I'm going to head and get some sucrose solution here. And I'm gonna add my live yeast to that. Oh, I didn't get it good. I didn't get that very well. Okay. So that's my live yeast mixed with my sugar. See, that looks good. And then I'm going to, as carefully as possible, I'm going to get some mineral oil. This is kind of hard to do while I'm holding the phone, but I want to drop the mineral oil. I would probably tilt this beaker to the side if I had both my hands free. But I want the mineral oil to cover my solution here. So there's a little bit of solution that's not covered by the oil, so I'm going to go ahead and add a little bit more. So that is completely covered with mineral oil. If you look at it from the side, you can see your yeast and sugar is separated from the oil. The oil is on top. Okay, and then I'm going to incubate this here in this water bath, which is already at the right temperature. And if I need to verify my temperature here, I have my probe. I'm going to incubate that for 5 minutes, and I've already done that. It's already been incubating for the right amount of time. It doesn't look like my temperature is working, my temperature sensor is not working, so I'm going to unplug it and plug it back in. So you can see here that it's not quite reading 38. I have a hot water bath, so I'm just going to go ahead and set this in the hot water bath just to make sure it's at the right temperature. For this lab, what I have my students do is they just go ahead and add hot water, or they add cold water just to get it to the right temperature. And once they get it to the right temperature, they just let it sit there for about 5 minutes. I just prepared my yeast, so I'm pretty sure my yeast is at the right temperature already. But you want to make sure the yeast is at the right temperature before you start collecting data because otherwise, if it's not within the range of tolerance, you could be killing the yeast, or the yeast may not be active. So students would let this sit for 5 minutes. Once it's incubated for 5 minutes, they're going to take this entire setup, they're going to put it into their chamber, and then they're going to make sure that it's sealed properly. And they're going to put their CO2 sensor inside of here. And they're going to make sure that's all sealed properly. I have duct tape on top because we're not using an oxygen sensor along with this CO2 sensor. Now, I'm going to go to my LabQuest. Give me 1 second here. And I'm going to say I want to collect data for, let me see, let's say 10 minutes. It might be hard for you to see this, but collect data for 10 minutes. And I need to change this to minutes here. And I want to get 2 samples per minute. And so, I don't know how well you can see that, but okay. And then when I'm ready to go ahead and start collecting the data, it's all set up. I just hit run. Now, I have my live yeast in there. I can look at it as a graph and just watch the graph for 10 minutes and watch the graph. Or what I have my students do, I know it's very hard for you to see this, is I have them hit the table mode. Let me see if I can get this to come out okay. So they just look at the data, like literally they're looking at the numbers as they pop up. And I have them just write down what the values are as they pop up. And then I have them graph that by hand. So they're gonna do this 4 times. They're gonna do it with dead yeast and oil, then dead yeast without oil, and then they're gonna do it again with live yeast with oil, and live yeast without oil. So you can see here, this is collecting data. It's working fine. And so there's no problems here. Once they have data collected, it will automatically stop. They could store their data. I'm just gonna stop it because I already have the data collected. They're gonna take this whole thing off. They're gonna make sure that they pull this out. And then really what they need to do is, as carefully as possible, they're going to try to suck out, I don't know if you can see that very well, they're gonna tilt this to the side and they're gonna try to suck out just the yeast on the bottom with the sugar. So the yeast and sugar solution with a pipette. And then they're gonna transfer that into a new container. If I don't have enough of these 50 milliliter beakers, then I'll just tell the kids to just suck out the oil off the top without removing the yeast solution that's in the sugar. And then we can use the same beaker that way. So once they get that set up, and let me show you, give me a second here, just bear with me. So, don't know how well I did that. So now I have this on its own. So now I have to go back and I have to incubate it again for 5 minutes. And I'm gonna go ahead and just put mine in the other beaker that I have set up at the right temperature. That hasn't been sitting out. And what I want to try to show you is once we let it's active yeast, once we let it sit around, do we see anything happening? Like what kind of observations might we make? What I tell students to look for is any bubbles, any type of activity. I tell them to make observations for all 4 runs in addition to the data that they're collecting. So you would take this after it's incubated for 5 minutes. And once again, you would transfer it into your chamber. You would make sure this is all aired out. You put the top back on. And now you have your live yeast, the same yeast with the sugar, but now there's no mineral oil on top. And you're gonna go ahead and put the CO2 sensor back in there. And then you're going to run it again for another 10 minutes. Now you could run it for like 5 minutes. I find that 10 minutes works well. So you run it again for 10 minutes and then you collect the data. So when you're done with the experiment, you should have 4 runs that you've collected data for. And then the students can collect all four of those, they can graph all 4 of those data points that they got. I'll share the data with you in just a minute.